inspiring you to set the marketplace ablaze in partnership with an awesome and limitless God. This is the Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur Podcast, and this isn't business as usual. Here's your host and Chief Fire Igniter, Shay Bynes.
Welcome back to the Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur Podcast. This is your host, Shay Bynes, and our goal here is to inspire you to operate your business completely yielded and in partnership with our awesome and limitless God. Today's guest is Tammie McClafferty, Executive Director of Lifework Leadership. And I also have with me Mr. Bynes.
Hey.
We call you the father of the movement. Well, that's what the Lord calls you, the father of the movement.
Something like that.
And CEO of Kingdom Driven LLC. How's it going, Phil?
Well, I'm doing well, and I'm happy to be back.
Yes. And so we're trying something different with the podcast. We're going to have some good conversation after the interview and hopefully leave you guys with some really great takeaways. But Tammie has a really great story, right, Phil? I mean, she is an accidental entrepreneur. She was a third grade teacher, had no business experience, ended up owning one of the most successful childcare centers in her area, and then now working in the nonprofit arena, but yet leveraging that entrepreneurial skill and heart to really help their organization thrive and have a greater kingdom impact in their local area in the Jacksonville Beach, Florida area. So, Phil, you ready for us to get started with today's interview?
Let's go.
All right. Listen in and enjoy this conversation with Tammie McClafferty. Tammie McClafferty, how are you today?
I am well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me on. This is exciting.
Absolutely. You and I have a mutual friend, a dear friend, one of my best friends from my childhood, which is how we got connected. And when we met and I heard your story, I knew that I wanted, you have a unique kind of approach to the nonprofit world, being an entrepreneur and educator, and then heading into the nonprofit world. And so I want to just explore just what your adventures of doing business in partnership with God have looked like. So let's start. I mean, you're the executive director of Lifework now. First, let everybody know pretty briefly like what Lifework does, and then I want to go backwards in your story a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. Lifework is a nonprofit. It is a faith-based leadership development program. So it's been around almost 30 years. It's all over the world. We have affiliate cities everywhere. I run the Jacksonville, Florida one, but we have cities all over the world. And really the goal of it is to get professionals in a city together to train and learn how Jesus led his disciples. Because the theory behind it really is the disciples were business leaders, right? We had fishermen who were labor. We had doctors, we had politicians, we had tax collectors, we had the finance district. But at the end of the day, Jesus strategically picked 12 businessmen and he poured into them. And then he said, now go back out and do what you're doing. You know, we know Paul stayed a tent maker. We know. So they did their jobs.
Yes.
But when they went back out, they took the gospel with them. And that is how the world has been transformed. So Lifework takes that same model. Let's pull in every professional, every business leader in our city that has a faith, and it's non-denominational. Train them up in those same leadership skills that we saw Jesus demonstrate with his disciples, send them back out into our city to make kingdom impact. So that is the goal of Lifework.
That's awesome. And so when you talk about business professionals, that means it's a blend. You've got small business owners, you've got professionals, executives in corporations, and all types of leaders.
We do. We have from, last year in the class, we had a stay-at-home mom who had been home for years and said, my kids are now back in school. I think I want to start a business. So at the time, she wasn't even working, but I'm ready to do this. To, this year we had, we've had the congressman come through, the sheriff come through, the president of Florida Blue come through. I mean, so the 3 top executives of Fanatics, sports apparel are in this year's class. So we've got, professors and the head of oncology at Mayo Clinic to young entrepreneurs. I mean, I think we have 4 millennials in this year's class that are just branching out to start their own businesses, whether it's marketing or, a web design company. So very diverse, men, women, young, old. We have one guy who's retired and came in this year and just said, I've got this second half of my life that I want to make an impact. Right. What do I do? And so he's looking for that kind of second half. What do I do?
That's goodness. I love that. Okay. So I want to go back in your story because you formerly were a business owner. So I want to go back and tell me how you got your start in business and how God just even led you into that in the first place. Because if I remember correctly, business was not on your agenda.
It was not. I was an educator. I was an elementary ed teacher teaching third grade. I mean, very, loved my job, loved what I did. But I always say my story kind of started when I was pregnant with my daughter. So I was 20 some years old teaching, got pregnant and realized that I was, growing up in the Christian world that I grew up in. It was relatively conservative. There was this understanding that you're going to have a baby and you're going to quit your job and raise that baby. And for some people, that might be perfect. But for me, I really wrestled with it because I think at the end of the day, the way God wired me, I love to work. Like that sounds crazy, but I love to work. And thinking I'm now going to have this kid and I can't do that really kind of stressed me out. So that became like, all right, Lord, now what are we going to do? I'm going to have this kid. I want to work. I want to raise this kid. I mean, I know you've blessed me with her, and trying to figure that all out. And so that led me to starting a daycare. I thought I'm going to start this little daycare for my own child. It'll be academic because the teacher in me wanted it to be academic. It will be faith-based. And I'll have, at the root of it, I'll have control, right? Because that's my issue is I want control. So this way I'll have control over my daughter's childcare when I go back to work. I mean, and so that was, what I kind of thought. And as God always does, immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine. And I always throw that out because I couldn't have imagined what he was about to do. But when we opened this little center where we were at in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, it just, struck a nerve and was wildly successful. God just honored us, I think, in our raw, Lord, we want to do it all and we don't know how to do it. So here we're just going to, try this. And before we knew it, within a couple of years, we had the fastest growing childcare center in the state of Pennsylvania, had franchised out to 4 locations, had received the largest grant in the state to take all of our employees to Disney World to train under Disney to learn how to do kids better. We had thousands of students, we had 50 plus employees, and we just kind of woke up and we're like, I always say, we were running a business that we had no business running because I was a third grade teacher that had 0 business experience. My husband was a physical therapist. I mean, so neither of us had any business background whatsoever. And although it was in education, which I understood the curriculum part of it and the teaching, as soon as you own the business, I was no longer teaching. Like I'm running the business. There's payroll, there's insurance, there's workman's comp, there's liability issues, there's, just staff development. I mean, this whole world that I didn't know existed. And so that's what we did for several years. We owned and operated one of the largest childcare centers in the state of Pennsylvania. And
on accident.
On accident. And to God's credit, I then had 3 kids by the end of this. And I got to spend every single day with my own children, teaching, which is what I was called to do, and then learning a trade in the business world that I didn't know I loved. But, that's how good God is. Like, I didn't even know that could happen. And I just said, Lord, here's the thing I want. I want to be a good mom. I want to spend time with my kids. I love to work. I love to teach here. And God is so good because I couldn't have dreamt that up. But he just, loves us enough to give us what we don't even know we want. And so we were just very blessed.
Wow. So it's striking, though, because some people, when they do their first business, they don't have a bunch of overhead, it's a home-based business. It's, it's a service-based business or whatever. But you went from, I'm an educator, now I'm pregnant and now I'm going to own a business with a whole building and have employees out the gate and no business experience with your husband who also had no business experience.
Probably not wise.
So this is like supernatural to me. So
yeah, it is. It is. It truly is.
I want to know what it was like, even in those early days, as 2 people kind of coming into it with you having, you certainly having knowledge, industry knowledge and education and that aspect. Well, what was it like? Was it just this daily surrender? Like, how was God leading you in these early days to even figure out the pieces of how to be an effective business owner? And I just want to know an awesome story of just where the favor of God made some kind of awesome shift in your business.
It did. It's such a cool story. I think when we take a risk, and I know not everybody's risk taker, so I'm wired that way and I get it. Like, it's easier for me to take a risk because that's just the way God wired me. But even for somebody who maybe is more of a risk taker like me, when we still take that step, and we know this on paper, God shows up. And so he just becomes so much more real, because at the end of the day, I couldn't do that. I mean, there's no way humanly possible. I had the knowledge, the skill, the finances, the reason. I mean, we had nothing. And when you think you hear God and you just walk in it, you get to live his miracles every day. And there's such a sweetness about that I think to this day is what drives me to be entrepreneurial, even to this day, because when you're in that place, like pouring a cement floor that you don't know how to do it, as simple as that is, you go, okay, God, like, I'm doing this to try to save money, or so you got to step up, because I don't know what I'm doing. And, and he does, right? I mean, that's the God we serve. He does show up. And so I think when we started the business, we were young. So it was like, whatever, right? I mean, we're young.
You're early 20s, right?
Early 20s. Yeah. So clueless. And definitely one of those that you hear people say, if I knew then what I know now, I probably wouldn't have. But again, that's God's grace. We don't know. We go into it blindly and just say, okay, God, I'm going to give you as much as I can give you. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to honor you. I'm going to support you. And then here, you do it. And I think, I had an extremely supportive husband, which is helpful because he just let me go with it and helped in every way possible. We sacrificed a lot at that early age. We were newly married, had a baby, had just gotten our first house, like trying to do the normal things. And when we decided to do the business, we had to sell the house. We had to move in with family, a brand new baby. Many, many, many a nights I went, what in the world did I do to my family? Right? Because this was my idea. Right. So now my husband, my brand new baby, has to travel this journey with me because I had this bright idea. And, and so there was sacrifice, no doubt there was sacrifice, which now I can look back and say, what a blessing that was. Time with my family. And, it was worth it. But in the moment when you're living at your family's house in mid-20s with a baby, not fun. So we made a lot of sacrifices. We sold the house to buy this business because we thought, again, if we're going to do it, God calls us to excellence. So I'm not going to do it half-heartedly. I'm either going to do it big and fail and say, well, Lord, we tried, or I'm not going to do it all, right? So we were like, we're going to go all in. So we bought an old building that needed renovated, and we thought we're just going to start from scratch. And again, so much you learn in those days of just, being there and on the ground. And the miracles, as you mentioned, supernatural, that God. So it was just me. And my husband couldn't even work because he didn't have the education degree. So in a childcare, you have to have a certain degree. Right. Doesn't matter how qualified you are, you have to have a certain degree to be in that position. And my husband didn't have it. So it was just me. And we sold everything we had. Everything we had to buy this building. I remember wanting to get a sign out front, and we needed a variance from our city to get the sign to be at a level because it was kind of on a hill and you couldn't see. The city said you can only have a sign that's X amount high. And if we did that, you wouldn't have been able to see the sign because of the elevation of the land. Right. So we had to ask the city for a variance, which again, this was language I didn't, variance city. Right. I was a third grade teacher, right? So I remember sitting in our city meeting, asking for a variance. And they said to me, I'll never forget it. Well, it's a $400 check just to ask us for the variance. You need to pay to get in front of us, basically to ask a $400 check. And I thought, I don't have $400. I did not have $400 to ask the city. That's how broke we were in investing in this. And so I remember saying to the city, well, I'll have to come back next month because I'm going to have to save money to pay to come in to ask you. And there was a gentleman in the corner. I don't even know who he was. I don't know his name. He said, I'll cover your cost.
Wow.
And he paid. I don't even know him. I couldn't even send a thank you card. I don't know who the guy was. But he paid the $400 to give me a chance to get in front of the city to ask for the variance for the sign.
Wow.
And so, those are the things that you just, okay, God's in this. It's hard and it's dirty and it's messy, but God is in it. And just it started from the signs to then we went to open the doors, and we were open from 6 a.m. till 6 p.m. I can't work. We were open Monday through Friday from 6 to 6. And I was like, okay, I have to have another employee. Again, no money. I don't have $400 to scrape. Right. How am I going to hire somebody? Yeah. Right. And my parents go to a wedding and they're sitting at a table with a lady. I wasn't even there. Who was again, God is so good. She was my student teaching supervisor. So she was a teacher. And when I had to do student teaching years prior, she was my supervisor. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. And she had just been laid off. Her school closed and she was jobless. And my parents are telling her what I'm trying to do. And she said, I got a really nice severance package because of the way the school closed. Do you think your daughter would need help in doing this? And so they connect me with Sandy. Love was her name. She was amazing. And I tell her, Sandy, I do need help, but I can't pay you. She said, I'm good. I'll track my salary. And when we start making money, you can pay me back if we get there. But I have a severance and I want to do this as unto the Lord. So for the first 4 months, this woman worked harder than me. Honestly, she was amazing and never took $1.
Wow.
Never took $1. We're working 6 to 6, changing diapers. I mean, nasty work. Like, this isn't fun work. Like, we were in the trenches. And God loved this woman. I mean, and thankfully, he so blessed us and blessed her that I was able to, not only pay her back, but give her a more abundant salary at the end of it than she would have ever experienced in the traditional education form. And, but who does that? Who says I'll work for you for free to do a launch startup? I mean, who does that?
Yeah, so that's not God. Normal. Nor is it normal for strangers decide to just give you $400.
Yeah, cover my variance. Yep. Yep. And, we call them hope sightings or God sightings. People say that all the time. But I think when you take that risk and you say, okay, Lord, I'm all in.
Yes.
Right when you're about to quit, right when you're done, God shows up with those kind of things to just say, just keep going. I gotcha. And those are the sweet moments that make it all worth it.
Now, what was going on because you said that you went up to 4. Didn't you own 4?
We did. We franchised out. We had 4.
So now ultimately, how long did you have that business for?
6 years before we took our sabbatical, which is what got us to Florida, which we had talked about. And then after we came to Florida, we owned and operated it for 3 years before we sold the corporation. And then we still owned the buildings for a couple years until we eventually sold the building. So altogether, we were in that business for probably 12 years.
Okay. All right. So thank you for sharing all of that. That's so good.
Yeah.
All right. Now, so you then transitioned to Florida. So what's the story there?
So that was our sabbatical season. So, serving in this business for 6 years. And when, anybody that knows a small business and it's yours, it is your life. I mean, you eat, sleep, breathe it. Your whole family does. I mean, it's a small business and you're just living it. And so my husband came home one day and said, hey, we're just not really honoring the Sabbath the way that I think we should. And again, I'm like, hey, we run a Christian school. Like, we run the Bible study at church. His degree is in pastoral counseling. Like, we got the God thing. And he's like, no, I just don't think we're really honoring it the way we should. So he really challenged me. And again, I mean, my husband is, 1 in a million, but really just challenged me and said, we need to spend the next couple of months studying the Sabbath and see what the Lord speaks to us about how we need to do our Sabbath better. And so both of us independently, just kind of in our, quiet time, was really studying the Sabbath for a couple of months and really understanding that we have to be strategic about our day of rest as well.
We're very intentional about it.
Yeah. So just walked through that for several months and then ultimately said, not only did God say you work 6 days and rest is 7, but God said you work the land for 6 years and then you rest the land for the 7th year, which is where in education we get a sabbatical. And we had done the business for 6 years. And after really studying this, my husband and I got together and said, I think we owe the Lord a sabbatical. Like, he's blessed us with this business. And I think we owe him a year. So we decided to take a year off. We hired twice as many employees, which our accountant thought we were crazy. Here we were at the pinnacle of this business, right? We just were awarded this huge grant from the state. We had achieved this Star 4 status. We had the fastest growing center in the state of Pennsylvania. We've got 4 locations. Like, we're climbing. And we go in and say, we're going to take a year off. Right. We're going to hire twice as many staff and we're walking away.
Yes.
And, again, not necessarily what makes sense on paper, but
Right.
Again, that's God's
That
economy,
was a conviction
right?
of, right.
That's right. And he says, I'll honor you for it. I'll let the land, it talks about make enough in that last year that it will get you through those. And so we decided to take a year off and found that Liberty University has a seminary in Jacksonville, Florida. And so it was a 1-year intensive program, and we really felt like God had blessed us so much. So we wanted to kind of give him back that year. And so we joined Liberty University's seminary program, both my husband and I, and moved the kiddos to Jacksonville, Florida, and did 1 year of seminary. Finished it in 2009, went back to Pennsylvania in 2009 when we finished, and realized we had fallen in love with Florida. Really, it was the weather. Like, we went back, it was a crappy winter. I was like, I'm out. I'm like, I know what it looks like now to live in Florida. I'm out. Right. So we moved back permanently in 2010. Sold the business. That's when we ended up started to sell the business. And so then we had to get real jobs again. So my husband went back into therapy. I went back into education, became a principal at a school down here. And quickly realized how much I loved the business piece, and recognized that I didn't have the education for that. Like, my education had all been, in education or in biblical studies, but not necessarily in business. So that's when I jumped back in for my doctorate. So I jumped into a program to earn my doctorate in organizational leadership, which is really how to lead an organization. Yes. That was kind of the goal. And so jumped into my doctorate, was a principal. That once I got enough credits in, it afforded me the opportunity to become a professor at the university. So I started teaching classes in leadership development and biblical studies.
Oh, nice.
And then became the director of that university. So I was overseeing the campus here in Jacksonville, and loved it. I mean, had a great job. My kids were now getting older. So, here's my husband now has a job at the college. He's the dean. I'm a director of a different university in town. We both get a month off at Christmas. I mean, we have it made again, right? God is good. And there we are. And, kids are getting in college age. So like free college tuition for the kids. Like, we have it made. And, but the entrepreneur in me, I really missed and I remember telling my husband this, and I think we talked about it before. I said, in education, which I'd been in some form of education for so long, I said, I can go to work with my eyes closed, right? I can teach spelling to kindergartners, and I can teach theology to adults. And I think when we become extremely comfortable in our career, whatever that is, we don't rely on God as much, because we don't need him, because we can do it in and of ourselves. I can teach a class to anybody. That was pretty easy for me. So not that I intentionally wasn't calling on God, but I didn't need to call on him like you did when you need $400 to buy a sign, right? And then you're like, oh Lord, so I think, and that's what I told him. I said, I just want a job where I fall on my knees every day and say, but God, like, I couldn't do this job, but God. And education didn't do that for me anymore. It was just a job.
Yes.
And so I walked away from the university, and my husband's like, well, what do you want? I'm like, I don't know. I just want something that makes me say, God, I got to have your help for this. And he gave me Lifework, which is nonprofit. So that was where oh my goodness came in.
Wow. So that's interesting. So then you take this position in a nonprofit organization with your entrepreneurial background and kind of that scrapper in you, where you just, that's what happens, in business. And then you worked in education. So you were in academia. Now you're going into a brand new world. Now you asked for this because you asked God. You said, I want to be in a position where I got to get on my knees daily. Like, Lord, I can only do this with you. So talk to me about what that transition looked like for you to go into a completely different space, because nonprofit doesn't operate the same as, owning your own business. And so how are you needing to lean on the Lord in the midst of that transition? And then how did you kind of bring your entrepreneurial, background? It's just your bent. It's just who you are. It's just inside of you into this space in order to kind of help the organization thrive.
Yeah. It was funny because Lifework is much more corporate. So again, I came from small business and education, and Lifework is dealing with executives, and a lot of really big executives. So big money, big men. I mean, it was a very white male world that I walked into. And even at the interview, I laughed because it was at like some big skyscraper downtown Jacksonville. I didn't even know how to park downtown. I was like, oh my goodness, like, what am I doing? Like, I teach elementary school. Like, I do glitter and glue. What am I walking into? And so I think going into Lifework, I anticipated that being the biggest but God, like walking into corporate America. I don't know corporate America. And I really thought that would be the difficulty of this position. When in reality, corporate America was not that difficult to walk into. They were people just like us. It was the nonprofit world that really rattled me and shocked me. I always tell people, I think, I've had the privilege of speaking at the nonprofit, center here. And I said, I think what shocked me was this concept of just asking people for money when you don't have it. Like that just blew my mind. And not that I didn't know that's what nonprofits did. Of course I knew that. But when I was the one that had to make the ask all of a sudden for my own paycheck, basically. So I would sit in front of these corporate sponsors and say, hey, will you donate money so I can get paid this week? I was like, what is that concept? Like, who thought that was a good idea? Like, who way back when thought this will work? I just was so blown away by that concept.
Yeah.
And so I was terrible at it. I mean, and this is no false humility I sucked at the ask.
Uh-huh.
And so I went to my board and I was like, okay, clearly this is not, I know where I have strengths and where I don't, and this is not one. So I'm going to need some help. So my board was gracious. They sent me through a year's worth of training at a sales training to learn how to make your pitch and, because I never had that. So I was like, okay, so I went through this training. I still sucked at it. You had to do your 30-second commercial. And I mean, on paper, I was a student of it, but I couldn't translate it. So then I said, okay, I'm going to have to get in front of some of these big corporate people that I'm getting to know a little bit better and ask them to help me. Like, what's my pitch? What's my ask? How do I do this? And so I sat with some of the biggest executives in the city and said, listen, I just need you to help me formulate my ask because I'm really bad at it. And I'll never forget the one guy. He said, okay. He sits back in his big, chair and he says, give me your pitch. And so I, rallied up and I give him my pitch and I thought I did really well. And we finished and he was like, that was horrible. He said, not only would I not give you money, I'm taking my money back. Like, wait, I know I suck. You got to help me. And so I just really genuinely was not good at the ask, which was difficult. So that was my, okay, God, like I have to get money for this. And I'm clearly not good at it. So you've got to help me think outside the box and do it differently than the way you have me wired. So you wired me different. So some people might be really good at the ask. I'm clearly not. You gave
and they
me
hired
position.
you despite.
They did, despite. They knew I had no corporate background. I knew no ask. So, I mean, that was a miracle in and of itself.
I was like, that was favor right there.
So, okay, God, I'm supposed to be here. So you wouldn't leave me unable to do it.
That's right.
So there's got to be a way. You got to help me be different. Be Tammie. Like, I'm not corporate. I'm not good in nonprofit, but I'm still where you want me to be. So there has to be a way that I can make this work. And so, I think coming from Pittsburgh, my background, I always, would tell people my dad worked in a steel mill. My mom worked in a deli. My mom never graduated high school. Like we were not of means. We were not educated people, but what we were hard workers. That's that blue collar mentality. And I would tell people if we didn't have money and I wanted a pair of jeans, I went and got a job. And if I still didn't have enough money, I got a second job or a third job, or I'd sell newspapers or like, it was just in us. If you didn't have enough, you work, right? Yeah. And so this concept in the nonprofit of, we don't have enough, let me just ask somebody, really just didn't sit with my blue collar self. It just didn't sit. And so that's really where I started saying, okay, Lord, the way you created me, the way you wired me is I work and I'm really good at work. So take what I'm good at and help me formulate that into the nonprofit world, because I love the ministry of Lifework and what it's doing. I believe in, and I can do the Lifework piece. So that's really what drove me to say, how can I make money? How can I work, generate revenue so that I don't have to do the ask? Because I'm really bad at the ask. And so once I kind of got that idea, like, let's do it different. Let's look outside the box. We created the idea to start a small business. And we went around and around about different ways we could do it. But again, needing it to fit into our nonprofit world, it had to meet our nonprofit mission, which Lifework's mission is transforming leaders to transform the city. So whatever business we were going to do, it had to fit that mission, right? And so then being the entrepreneur, crazy, person that I am, that was an easier ask for me because it was an ask of doing a business and starting something versus just saying, hey, can you give me $10,000? Instead, I said, hey, we decided to do a coffee shop. And so we were, again, another story for another day, another book we could write. But we were fortunate enough to have somebody donate the first 6 months of rent for free at a beachfront property in Jacksonville Beach. So we are beachfront. I mean, look outside, get the ocean. And somebody said, you can have it for 6 months for free because of what you're doing. So again, that was an easier ask for me than saying, can you give me $10,000? Because I believed in the business we were starting.
Yes.
And so I discovered quickly, I can ask if I believe in what my ask is. And it goes along with what my skills are. And so to ask, hey, we want to start a coffee shop in a homeless shelter at the beach where we will employ homeless people. That was the ask. That was an easy ask for me. And so quickly, within a matter of months, I was able to find a location. I was able to find employees who were not employees. They were volunteers, coordinate with the homeless shelter, and within 6 months, open a fully functioned, fully licensed coffee shop, certified by the Department of Agriculture, went through all of the fire marshal, all the stuff that you have to do. And we opened the doors in 6 months without spending $1, not at all.
Wow.
So we started, here's Lifework, this nonprofit. We started a second kind of subsidiary under it and its own LLC that we called Lifework Community Impact. And under that LLC, we started the Cup of Job, which is our coffee shop. And the goal is now, really the big goal was once we have this impact, we want to start multiple businesses all over the city that would feed into Lifework. So we're making money. Now Lifework's making money off this coffee shop.
Yes.
We've transformed the city, which is what Lifework's mission is, because now we've employed 12 homeless people in our first year. Our last guy, Billy, we just December 1st were able to get him enough money working for us. We got him to save it. We coordinated with a local nonprofit here that works with money. We got him a checking account, got him to save it, and we got to move him into his first apartment on December 1st.
So awesome.
So we are starting a business.
Yes.
That's serving our mission, that's transforming the city, but that's generating revenue for Lifework, which for me, that was easier to do than to go to a company and say, hey, I need $10,000.
I love that because sometimes we feel like we have to kind of force our way through figuring out how to do something that's completely outside of our, how we're wired, where you recognize, God, you put me here. I'm in a position that doesn't even make sense for me to be in on paper because they already knew I don't know how to do any of this stuff.
Right.
So I know that you're going to be the source of this thing. So if you got me here, I know that you've got what I need in order to thrive here. And then operated out of your gifting, kind of how he's wired you, and then found success there instead of fighting to try to make things happen. Talk about the grind, trying to force things to work in the other way. I love that. So let me ask you, what has been one of your greatest surprises in terms of how God's moved in the midst of this coffee shop business?
So cool. On paper, we said, we're going to start this coffee shop and it's going to transform the city. This little Jack's Beach, it's this little beach community here out, right on the outskirts of Jacksonville. And it's a small little beach community. And I think we said that, like when we wrote the mission statement for it, we're going to transform Jack's Beach. But we really have transformed Jack's Beach, which is amazing to me that a coffee shop could do that. And again, only by God's grace, because we went into it blindly. Oh, we'll start a coffee shop. I'm not even a coffee connoisseur. I didn't even know how to brew an espresso. I didn't know the difference between a cappuccino and a latte when we started this. So again, clearly not a skill set that I had. But when we stepped into it because of God, I didn't realize, you think of Cheers from a long time ago, everybody knows your name.
Yes.
Our coffee shop has become this haven for the community that, people have walked in from all over the world because it's a beach. So it's a very touristy place, right? We're in the middle of 4 hotels on the beach. And there's this little retro coffee shop at a homeless shelter. I mean, it's just this random place. And so people walk in and say to us all the time, there's just something different. I feel different here. And to know that we have genuinely, through a 2,000 square foot coffee shop, have transformed a city is humbling and exciting all at the same time, to think that coffee could do that. Who would have guessed that sitting across a table, having a cup of coffee with somebody? But we genuinely, we had a gentleman come in, Mayo Clinic is up here. So we have, the big Mayo Clinic, and he had traveled here in an RV to have a pretty extensive surgery. And so he was going to be here for months in his RV, and he stumbled across our coffee shop, and he walked in, and he was, atheist to boot. I mean, wore a shirt that declared his atheism. I mean, he was just one of those guys. Loved him, right? But I mean, he just came in boldly. And here we are serving our little coffee that's, called Cup of Job, and it's after Job 22:21. And all of our little coffees are named Hebrews. And I mean, clearly just this little Christian coffee house. Right. And in walks this atheist. And we serve him the coffee, and he's like, I don't think I'm going to be able to come back here. This is too Jesus-y for me. And that's what he says. And I said, well, just let me remind you that Jesus is for everybody, right? I mean, that's kind of our story. He's for you too, whether you realize it or not. And you don't have to accept him, but he still loves you and died for you. And so we strike up a conversation, and the gentleman comes back. So for 6 months, this gentleman graces our coffee shop every single day. And he's one of those atheists, we laugh. His name's Steve. And he's one of those that he wants to debate, and he wants to engage, and he wants to get you fired up. Like, he just wants to. So he's like challenged by this little Christian coffee shop and all of us in there, right? So for 6 months, Steve just engages with us, and we pour into him and we share with him. And he didn't have family here. So when the surgery came, he needed people that were going to be his on call here at Mayo Clinic. Yes. And he chose the staff of the coffee shop. So for the duration of his time in Mayo Clinic, we had one of our volunteers from the coffee shop sit with him for 3 weeks straight, never left his bedside, prayed over him, wiped him down, cleaned him up, gave him medicine. These were just volunteers at a coffee shop who recognized this man, and did this man give his life to Christ? Not that we know of. But for 6 months, we poured into this man, got him through this intense surgery, and got to share the love of Jesus from a cup of coffee. I mean, it's been really cool to see what God does with a cup of coffee, right? Yeah.
That's so good. That's so good. There's something else I want to ask you about. That's kind of opening up a whole nother can, but
lots of cans.
Yeah, lots of cans here. I'm curious to know whether you have found rest within your work. Like, so you're working, yes. Some people may hear that and think, okay, well, she just said she works hard, so she just grinds, and then, and then I'm exhausted, and then I'm going to go shopping. My question to you, I have to ask this because I wrote a book called Grace Over Grind, so I have to ask this question. So,
it's a good question.
Have you found rest in your work? And if so, what does that look like or mean to you and how you approach your day to day?
Such a good question. I would say the answer is yes and no. And that is on my heart, because when we're in the job that God's called us to, then we should be in a place of rest, right? Because we're right where God wants us. And so the majority of the time that I've been at Lifework, I would say I am at rest, even though I'm grinding, even though I'm pouring cement and I'm starting coffee shops. And now we've started a teen Lifework program. And then so we've now started multiple of these. I mean, I shared the coffee shop, but we're now down to where we're doing all these. And so I'm busy. I'm a very busy person. Sure. But I would say I am a very rested person because I'm right where God wants me. So I don't have trouble sleeping at night. I'm not one of these people that come home and I'm keyed up at night. I mean, my head hits the pillow and I'm out. Like, I have worked hard and I'm good with my work the majority of the time. There's a book called Business God's Way. And there's a little story in it when they talk about how, understanding that God owns it all, which we know. But that means that God's my CEO. So even though I'm the executive director of Lifework, and even though I'm the one running the coffee shop, and I'm the one running the teen program, and I'm the one running they're God's. And so I report to him. And so in this book, they give this little scenario of how you should, to start your day, go into God's office and say, Lord, what do you want me to do today for your business? And then listen to him, have him tell you what he wants you to do for the day with his business, because it's his, then go do it. And then check back in at the end of the day and say, you asked me to do this. I did this. I either got it all done, I didn't get it done because I stopped to talk to this person or whatever. And ask the question, am I still hired to come back to work for you tomorrow? Do I do enough today for you to hire me back tomorrow? Because at the end of the day, he could fire me if I don't do that, right?
Right.
And so this little story was like, and I'm such a visual learner. I was elementary that I thought, okay, that's so true. Like I knew that, but to really visualize that in my morning devotions.
Yeah.
But now I've got Jesus sitting at this mahogany, angled desk.
So good.
And I walk in humbly in the morning and say, Lifework is yours and the coffee shop is yours.
Yes.
You hired me to run it. What would you like me to do today?
It's good.
And then I sit and I listen. And he tells me, today I want you to pour cement floor because your floor stinks, right? Whatever it is.
Right.
And then I go and I do that. And
Yes.
then I check back in at the end of the day and I say, Lord, I know you wanted me to get this done, but I didn't get it all done because somebody came in and asked for prayer. So I did stop and pray for them. Or, or Lord, I just got caught up on Facebook and I didn't give you as much as I should have today. And I'm sorry, right? But we have that conversation with him at the end of the day. And in doing that, when I'm done with that evening conversation of him and I shut my day down and I walk out of his office, I can rest because I know either I worked really hard that day and did well, or I confessed that I didn't. And we know God loves us. So even if there is a day that I don't do what I should have done as well as I should have because I fiddle farted around or whatever,
right?
I can go to him and honestly say, God, I'm sorry. I did not work as hard as I should have for you today. And I didn't get as much done as I wanted. I'm sorry. Can I come back tomorrow and try it again? And knowing that God's not going to fire us because he loves us. It lets me rest at night because I've either done it right or I've confessed it and I know I get to start again tomorrow. So I would say I am very rested in my busyness and in my work.
Yes.
When I keep that straight.
Yes.
But when we run off and we don't do that, whether we get so busy in our work or our life or our kids or quarantine and the pandemic and whatever we do, and we forget to check in with our CEO, that's when I'm not rested. And you can tell the difference. We know that. We've walked with God long enough to know that when I lay my head down at night and I'm anxious,
yes,
chances are it's because I screwed it up, right? I didn't go to God, right? We know that. So I would say I am very rested in my work when I do it right. But when I screw it up, there is that uneasiness.
And and I think the fact that the difference is super key, right? Because that helps you to reset.
Yep.
That's
Absolutely.
really good. Thank you for sharing that. This has been so good. Tammie, how do people get information on Lifework or connect with you? Where do people go?
Yeah. So if you go to our website, it's Lifework, Lifework, First Coast, because Jacksonville is considered St. Augustine the First Coast. So they call it the First Coast. So it's lifeworkfirstcoast.com. And when you go to that website, it'll tell you everything about Lifework, about the coffee shop, about the teen program. It'll have a contact us, so you can get in touch with me directly from the website. And then it'll take you to our global. We have a link to the global page. So if you're tuning in from somewhere else, not in the Jacksonville area, we have Lifework all over the world. So to find out if there's a Lifework near you, click on our global link and it'll take you to the global page and you'll know if there's a Lifework near you.
Very good. Thanks for joining me today, Tammie. Appreciate you.
I can't wait till you come up to Jacksonville.
Same.
You gotta get up here
back
and have lunch with us. I know. I need to get you up here. So
we got to do it. All
right. Sounds
Thanks,
good.
Tammie.
Shane, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Such a great conversation with Tammie. What'd you think, Phil?
It was awesome. And, the first thing that stuck out to me was the fact that, God met her exactly where she was. She talked a lot about, she really loves the work and how God met her there, because even in her work, she said that she finds pleasure in it. She finds joy. So for her, maybe it's not really hard work, it's diligent work, but I like that.
Yeah, that's good. And, they got their own kind of understanding and flow about how they wanted to deal with Sabbath. And also she chatted at the end about just finding that that rhythm with God in the midst of the work. So he's like, listen, I'm blue collar. I like to work. I enjoy it. But she's finding that rest and that flow within our work, which is good. The other thing about meeting her where she is, though, was this whole thing about risk, because she talked about, like, I'm sure some people were listening to this interview and were like, yeah, I could never take a risk like that. Like, risk is just in her nature, and she would risk big. I think she even said at one point, like, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it big. She's not the one that says, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to take a small step and go. Her personality type is, I'm going to risk, therefore I'm going to risk big. And God met her right in the midst of that, with that being her style and her personality. God met her in the midst of her big risk-taking personality.
Yeah. And, it reminds me of one of your wonder twins. With faith and patience, they have attained the promises,
Yes.
of old. And it fits right along with that type of personality, because she has the faith to take those big risks. And it comes with a little bit of patience, and God will stretch that patience just to almost the breaking point, I would say. And then he jumps in. I see that happening with that a lot, that type of thought, that type of personality.
Yeah. So definitely the gift of faith. So you guys don't have to listen to this and think, oh my gosh, because here's the thing. What happens sometimes is people hear someone else's story and then they feel like, oh, well, then I have to go big. Some folks, listen, if that's not you, God's not leading you in that direction, and that is not your nature, and that's not the gift of faith that you have for that, and you're just going to go hop off of a cliff, we're not advising that. Nope. But God, if that's just who you are, it's like, go for it. God will meet you right there, and it's good.
That's it. He meets you where you are, and he grows you from there.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I really like that. What else stuck out for you?
Just the way that he even worked within her identity, like that whole working mindset. And she hit a point even in the nonprofit where, she was trying to ask and it wasn't working for her because it was not part of her personality. So God gave her wisdom, I believe, through the Holy Spirit, that went along with her personality. Here's how you can do it. You can go out there and earn the money.
Yeah.
Through this coffee shop.
Right. So that's her working by his grace. It would have been a grind for her trying to operate against her nature, against her personality, against her skills to do that. But here's the thing that I think is very interesting, though. The fact of the matter is that they hired her knowing that. It would be one thing, because sometimes God puts us in positions where we don't have a skill, but he stretches us and gives us the grace to learn the skill. Mm-hmm. So that happens too. But in this case, they hired her knowing for a position that supposedly required that skill. And they hired her. So she knew God has placed me here. So I'm going to allow, God I'm going to flow in the way that God's created me. And I thought that was wise and insightful. And I'm sure something that, the Holy Spirit really put on her heart. So that really stuck out to me as well. And I also love the kind of the family dynamic. It sounds like, with her and her husband, they have they are on one accord from the beginning when they were in their early 20s to make such a sacrifice for business. I mean, these types of things can be a disaster when you're not on one accord with your spouse.
Yeah, that's so true. That's what we learn. You take risks together as a family. One person doesn't take that risk, right? Everybody has to take the risk together. And, although it was uncomfortable, it was like they sowed a seed for the next. And so that was pretty cool. One thing I also want to point out is the fact that, collaboration showed up in this podcast episode. Like, she collaborated with the people that she was, working with. When she went to some of those corporate people and did the pitch before them, and they were like, "Oh, no, you suck at that." She went and she sought advice. Yes. And she collaborated, and then that's how she actually wound up coming up with the way that she was going to go forward, which is doing the business.
That's right. We saw a thread. So if we're thinking about the heart of our movement and the core principles, we saw radical generosity all through there with complete strangers, as well as the person I'm talking about back with the childcare center, the person who said, I'll pay for that, even though he didn't even know her, and paid her $400 bill just to sit in front of these people. The person who said, I am going to work for you for free for months, radical generosity, right? And there's, that's just like you said, we saw collaboration here, and we see her walking out the working by the power of his grace and walking that out of his grace and favor. So we saw some good stuff in here.
Yeah, that was at least 4 of the 5 tenets we got, right?
So really good, you guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode today. Before we go, want to remind you that if you really want to dig in a little deeper on doing business in partnership with God, and you have not purchased our Firestarter School, purchase the Firestarter School. It's about, what'd you say, Phil?
I said, just do it.
Just do it. It is available at the price of your own choice. We've made it super simple. It is about 3 hours of audio, just mentoring and teaching around just some of the fundamentals of making this shift of doing business, not just for the glory of God, but doing business with the presence of God, operating as a kingdom-driven entrepreneur. We call it the basic training for kingdom-driven entrepreneurship. And so we invite you to take a part of that. And lastly, if you love this podcast, do us a favor and give us a review on your favorite podcast platform. We would appreciate that so very much. Mr. Bynes, before we go, is there anything that you wanted to add?
No, there's nothing to add.
All right, well then we will see you next week on the next episode of the Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur Podcast. Take care. God bless you guys.
Thanks for joining us on the Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur Podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, we encourage you to subscribe and spread the word. And don't forget, you can gain access to even more resources, plus a thriving community of fire starters by visiting our website at kingdomdrivenentrepreneur.com.